Legacy overload. That's what he called me. I was halfway through updating a compliance audit spreadsheet when the screen flashed, and there he was, Matt, 30 at most, the kind of guy who would use the word synergy in bed and think Excel macros were cutting-edge witchcraft. The CFO introduced him as an efficiency optimizer, which is corporate code for smiling executioner. Tanned, bleached teeth, hairstyled as if he had Googled alpha male haircut. Perfectly tailored navy blue suit. Watch that cost more than my used car. Hi everyone, he said with that smile you see on guys who still do beer chugging contests at weddings. I'm here to modernize operations and eliminate process redundancies. His eyes found me through the screen as if he were scanning which piece of antique furniture to throw out first. I didn't flinch. I just clicked Save As in the folder where I kept all the licensing documents, federal renewal stamps, and internal compliance chains linked to my name. I labeled it Church Pancake Recipes, and backed it up to a private drive. My name is Zach Miller, I'm 42 years old, and I've been working at this company for 10 years. 10 years building every security protocol, every federal license, every certification that keeps this place running legally. And I wasn't going out like a rookie. At lunchtime, I overheard him in the break room joking with two junior analysts about eliminating boomer infrastructure. I'm not a boomer, but in Matt's world, if you don't TikTok your workflow, you're obsolete. Then came the meeting. Open floor, everyone standing as if it were an exorcism of common sense. Matt pulled out a presentation full of meaningless phrases like Agile Compliance Ecosystem and Decentralized Responsibility Centers. I saw 3 interns nodding as if they were witnessing the second coming of Elon Musk. Some members of our team, especially those with legacy responsibilities, will be re-evaluated to ensure alignment with our lean strategy, he said, then looked directly at me. We appreciate your historical contributions, Zach. Historical. As if I were a fucking sarcophagus in the HR basement. I didn't say a word. Just smiled. The kind of smile you give when someone steps on a trap you've been camouflaging for a decade. By Tuesday, Matt had taped a poster above the copier that read "Compliance is not compliance." The font was Comic Sans. Comic Sans. Like he was decorating a kindergarten classroom. Then came the real fun. Everyone, yes everyone, was instructed to reapply for their evolved role. It was sold as a team-building exercise, as if we should be grateful for the chance to apply for the same jobs printed on our health insurance cards. One by one, people shuffled into conference rooms like children going to the principal's office. The newest hires came out smiling, repeating things like "Matt really sees me," and "he's bringing fresh air." I wanted to tell them that kind of air comes from a broken sewer. When my turn came, I didn't bring a resume. I brought silence. Matt barely looked up from his laptop. "Zach, you've been here a while." 10 years, he said, cold as a cucumber in a snowstorm. Nice. Institutional knowledge, we value that. His fingers tapped the keys, probably typing "Fire Dinosaur" into Slack. He pulled up a poorly drawn organizational chart and pointed to a box labeled Regulatory Oversight. Under her, my name was crossed out. Next to it, Open for Reassignment. Then he clicked on a tab called Renewal Delegation Plan T3. In the comments was written, "Can this be transferred down?" Down, in Matt's language, meant dumped on someone too green to spell OSHA. I smiled. I didn't flinch. But inside, a siren started blaring. That night I stayed late. Not because I had to. I wanted to watch the system breathe like a mother watching her children sleep before the protection service showed up. I opened the database I had built from scratch in 2016. It tracked every compliance certificate, its expiration date, which regulatory agency was responsible for it, and who had signing authority. There were 43 items on the list. 43 licenses. 43 pieces of bureaucracy woven into a tight corporate rope. And all tied to my name. I exported a new copy of the record, encrypted it, compressed it, renamed it Employee Birthday Cake List, and sent it to a private account. Then I cleared the history items. I checked my credentials on 3 federal platforms: active certification, control renewal, PIN licensing, and audit clearance. Everything was still linked to my name. I checked the timestamps, double-checked them. Then I printed out my contract clause. The one no one ever reads. Section 7C, in the event of involuntary termination, All licensing responsibilities paid for by the company and regulatory certifications shall be deemed void, and all credentials shall be formally revoked within 48 hours of the termination of employment. No one noticed when I left the building, but I noticed the way Matt's eyes lingered on me the next morning. Like a lion staring at a cow, unaware that the cow has access to predatory drones. Have you ever seen a man confuse a fuse with a shoelace? You're about to. Because while Matt thought he was pruning dead branches, he was cutting the root that fed the entire tree. If you're enjoying this story of how an arrogant boss completely underestimated the wrong employee, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what Matt didn't know about that contract clause was about to turn his optimization into the biggest corporate nightmare he could ever imagine. And when the system I spent 10 years building started to crumble, he would discover that some people are irreplaceable for a very specific reason. First thing on Thursday, I heard laughter in the hallway about eliminating dead wood. It was 3 junior analysts, fresh out of college, still wet behind the ears and smug with borrowed confidence, hovering over a printout of my old compliance flowchart as if it were a cave painting. "This thing uses color codes like it's a Crayola box," one snorted. Another added, "She even stamps everything by hand. Does she even know there's such a thing as automation?" They were huddled near the break room like a pack of overconfident poodles, sipping iced coffee and spouting buzzwords like agile iteration and machine learning integration, as if those phrases had already prevented a federal audit. I walked past them with my head held high, but my spine burned. On Wednesday, I was blocked from 3 internal panels, 2 of which I designed. No warning, no access request. Just a red 4003 screen and a pop-up that said, "Contact your system administrator." Spoiler, I was the system administrator. Or I had been. I sent an email. No response. I tried calling HR. The answering machine was colder than January in Detroit. I finally got a real person after 4 tries. "Sorry, Zach. All HR requests now go through your department manager." "That's Matt," they said, as if announcing the second coming, but with more hair gel and less divine supervision. I didn't respond. I just hung up and stared at my monitor. Empty, but glowing. Cut off from every meaningful interface in less than a week. No explanation. Just optimization. Matt was smart in that insidious MBA way. Never smart enough to build anything, but smart enough to know how to dismantle under the cover of policy updates and reorganization memos. He'd started slipping little grenades into his weekly updates to leadership, legacy processes under review, potential staffing overlaps identified, redundant certification management identified. That last one was cute. As if you could overlay a federally mandated signature authority linked to my biometric profile. I had become a walking contradiction. Officially employed, but strategically erased. So I booked a 10-minute slot at a notary's office. A quiet place above a nail salon on Monroe Avenue. No fanfare. Just me, a hard chair, and a form titled Voluntary Waiver of Licensing Authority. I haven't signed it yet. Just had the option notarized. A safety pin tucked into my coat pocket, just in case things turned into a free-for-all. Then I walked back to the office with a mint coffee and the deadest smile you've ever seen. Matt passed me in the hallway and said, "Hope you're feeling more aligned this week." I nodded. "Just tying up loose ends." He smiled. The kind of corporate snake smile you'd find in the self-help section of a Barnes & Noble, next to Destroy Everything and a scented candle. What he didn't know was that every loose end I tied came with a fuse. And I had the match. It happened on a Monday, because of course it did. The kind of Monday when the air in the office feels like plastic heated in the microwave and everyone pretends they like their job just enough to survive another week. We were all gathered for Matt's weekly momentum drain, which was basically a TED Talk for sociopaths. He stood in front of the open plan corral in his tight blue blazer, making that open palm gesture like he was calming a flock of sheep. "Let's start with some honesty," he said. "That's how you always know someone is about to gut you in public, when they start with honesty." "We've been doing a lot of soul-searching over the last few weeks," he continued, walking as if he were about to sell us a timeshare in hell. "While tradition has value, stagnation is a threat." He stopped right behind my chair. I didn't turn around. "And unfortunately," he said loud and clear, "certain legacy functions are no longer aligned with our forward momentum." People began to shift in their chairs. Some looked down at the floor. Some looked at me. One guy tried to smile as if this were normal, as if we were just watching someone lose his parking spot, not his livelihood. Then came the punchline. Effective immediately, Matt announced, Zach Miller's position has been phased out. No warning. No meeting. No one-on-one. Just a sentence hanging in the air like a bullet. I stood up. Not because I was shaken, but because my legs felt too steady for how badly they wanted to kick him through the wall. HR, two of them, both young, both avoiding eye contact, approached me holding a shiny folder as if they were handing out communion. I took it, opened it, flipped to the termination page. No severance. Just legalese and a line to sign. I pulled a pen from my own bag, signed it in one go, then said, I'll need a hard copy. Matt blinked. It's all digital. Hard copy, I said. HR hesitated. I stared at him. 4 minutes later, I walked out of that office with a printed copy, a stapled receipt, and the calmness of a man who knew exactly what he had just done. You see, when I signed that form, Section 7C of my contract activated a silent clause in 3 federal databases. An invisible trigger wire. Every active certification paid for by the company, my certifications, immediately entered the queue for self-revocation. Not just expired. Not just suspended. Voided. At 7:13 p.m., my phone beeped with a confirmation email. Your authority over licenses number CN 8835-44, FD 2210-98, and MDR 5081-02 has been formally revoked. Entities dependent on these licenses will be marked as non-compliant in 24 hours unless reauthorized by a certified replacement. I didn't forward it. I didn't take a screenshot. I didn't even respond. I just sat in my apartment, drank boxed Merlot, watched reruns of Golden Girls while the digital noose began to tighten around Matt's precious forward momentum. And I slept like a damn baby. Because while Matt thought he was pruning dead branches, he was actually cutting the main artery that fed every vital organ of the company. Wednesday began with a groan and a very expensive box of nothing. At 9:04 a.m., procurement tried to confirm the shipment of medical filtration components to one of our biotech customers. Stuff you don't even breathe near without 3 signatures and a biohazard stamp. The supplier's response: unable to fulfill shipment. Recipient listed as inactive. License CN 883544 expired. Contact the listed certifying officer. Guess who that officer was? 10 minutes later, the system began logging anomalies. Logins failed. API calls choked. A data sync scheduled for the FDA audit portal returned a rejection code, invalid license holder. At that very moment, our internal license dashboard, once clean and green like a freshly mowed lawn, began to light up like a Christmas tree in hell. Red alerts. Inactive flags. Credentials marked as orphaned. Matt, always the summer rain diplomat, strolled through the operations pod with a disposable cup of some downtown coffee and said, let's just update the contact information. One of the compliance analysts, a poor girl named Renee, tried to explain, Sir, contact updates require recertification. Zach was the certifying officer. Legally. Matt blinked. Then do it anyway. He was the only certified officer with reauthorization authority across all active verticals. No one else is registered with the Federal Compliance Board. And the re-registration period takes weeks. There was a silence. Not the awkward kind. The fatal kind. Like watching someone realize the iceberg isn't going to move. Matt rubbed his temples and muttered, why the hell didn't anyone tell me this before? Renee, barely old enough to rent a car, replied, Zach was the one who told people that. Meanwhile, I was at home in my sweatpants, eating counterfeit cornflakes and reading the entire conversation from an anonymous email chain that a former colleague had kindly blind CC'd me on. Someone even included a screenshot of Matt's message to legal on Slack. Does anyone know how to override a license expiration tag in the dashboard thingy? Little thing. He called it a little thing. That dashboard had been my baby for 5 years. I designed it to lock tighter than Fort Knox if certain revocation events were triggered. It wasn't just bureaucratic. It was surgical. If someone without the proper credentials tried to access a certification, it blacklisted their IP and self-reported the intrusion to internal audit logs, which they also discovered that afternoon, because Matt had tried to force his way in. By lunchtime, HR was getting desperate pings from upper management. Can we bring Zach back? Does his confidentiality agreement prevent communication? Who approved this? No one answered because the only person who could have done so was too busy deciding whether to have soup or chicken nuggets for lunch. Spoiler, I went with both. That night, I opened LinkedIn and checked the company's old page. It still proudly boasted, federally certified in all operations. I almost felt bad. Almost. Instead, I smiled. Because I knew that on Thursday, that lie was going to cost more than just pride. Friday arrived with sirens no one could hear. Just the soft ping of a calendar alert and the thud of panic dropping into Matt's soy-filled gut. Random FDA website inspection. 10 a.m. It was legitimate random, yes, but randomized within a window Zach had always planned. Discreetly. Annually. Color-coded spreadsheet crossed with vendor contract terms, renewal cycles, and the phases of the damn moon, if necessary. Auditors don't mess around. They came in with clipboards and the moral authority of bulletproof vest-wearing IRS agents. At 9:22, reception called compliance. 3 inspectors here. They're asking for the license holder. Silence. Long, desperate silence. Because there wasn't one. Matt, now visibly sweating through his navy blue Banana Republic blazer, ran to the operations wing and barked at legal, "Can we reinstate Zach's credentials?" A poor junior associate Googled license reinstatement process, as if it were a guide to making banana bread. Meanwhile, Matt tried to log into the Federal Credentialing Board portal using Zach's old login. Access denied. He tried to request a password reset. User not found. He called the regulatory board's help desk. They transferred him 3 times, then calmly told him, Zach Miller voluntarily surrendered his license authority. His ID has been removed from the registry. Reinstatement requires full recertification. Average timeline, 4 to 6 weeks. Matt stared at the speakerphone as if it had just punched his mother. He turned to HR. What clause did he use to revoke his credentials? They leafed through his termination file, confused. We just processed the standard exit paperwork. I don't know anything about credentials. Someone from audit chimed in. Wait, didn't he have his own clause in his employment contract? That's when the room collectively remembered that Zach Miller wasn't some dusty compliance granny. He was the master pin. And they had pulled him like a wisdom tooth attached to the spine. Meanwhile, across town, Zach's phone rang. It was Liz from documentation. A decent person. Kind, baked cookies for audit week, and used to hide posted drawings on Zach's monitor back when the world made sense. Zach, Liz's voice was broken. Did you do this? Zach stirred his coffee, looked out the window at nothing, then smiled. No, he said calmly. You did. He didn't hang up hard. He didn't yell. That would have been giving them too much credit. Because this wasn't revenge. This was math. 1 + 1 = you fired the wrong person. The auditors were now sitting in the lobby. The company couldn't legally allow them into the secure wings without a licensed compliance officer present. Which meant the audit couldn't proceed. Which meant every vendor and customer relying on certified compliance for active projects would be in technical breach of contract in approximately 4 hours. And Zach? He was getting his nails done. Midnight burgundy, gel finish. Not because he needed it, but because power doesn't have to raise its voice. It just has to walk away. The seeds were sprouting, and the vines were tightening. And while Matt finally understood that he had confused a fuse with a shoelace, Zach was already planning his next move. Because when you build the entire system, you also know exactly where all the other points of failure are. Midnight. 8:37 a.m. The building smelled of stale coffee, dried sweat, and the silent shame of a company that had just stepped on its own oxygen hose. That's when he walked in. Gregory T. Winslow, CEO. Cruise tan, shiny as a roasted chicken, silk shirt still crisp from some resort in Monaco. The man radiated wealth, sunscreen, and complete alienation from reality. He strolled through the lobby like a Roman emperor returning from battle, waving to receptionists, firing finger guns at junior VPs. Good morning, everyone. I hope you didn't burn the place down while I was out. No one laughed. When he reached the executive floor, he had 3 urgent emails from compliance and a memo from legal that ended with non-compliance disaster. At 9:02, He burst into the operations room expecting light turbulence. Instead, he walked into a bloody plane crash. Operations frozen. Shipments suspended. Inspections failed. Certifications invalid. Angry customers. Revenue dashboard in a straight line. He turned to the room of red-eyed managers. Who's handling this? All heads pointed to Matt. Now he looked less like a visionary and more like a high school student who flooded the gym with glitter glue. Gregory pulled up my termination paperwork on a wall-mounted monitor. He read silently. He scrolled. He scrolled more. You fired the license holder, he said quietly, as if he couldn't believe his own words. Matt opened his mouth, closed it. You fired the person with sole federal licensing authority across all departments. Matt stammered. Her responsibilities were deemed redundant. Gregory laughed. Not like a joke. Like I found out my son sold our car for crypto. He pointed to the screen. Her name is on every regulatory document, every active license, every renewal path this company needs to exist. He opened a folder. Our top 5 suppliers suspended. All contracts frozen due to expired authorizations. He threw a piece of paper on the table. Zach Miller listed on every one. And you let a kid who writes in buzzword soup fire her? Matt tried one last Hail Mary. I thought we could reassign it. I said we could just update contact information. It's a federal license, not a damn email alias. Gregory grabbed his phone, searched for my contact. Nothing. HR chirped. We tried to contact her. She's not responding. Gregory sighed, then get her back. Matt coughed. She might not want to come back. Gregory looked at him like an insect on a leather moccasin. She'll come back. We'll double her pay. Name a wing after her, if necessary. But deep down, he knew that the person thrown away like moldy leftovers now held the keys to the entire kingdom. Across town, my inbox had 6 urgent messages from Gregory and a note from an assistant named Trevor who hadn't slept in days. Subject: Urgent return requested by CEO. I didn't open it right away. I finished my late breakfast. 2 fried eggs, toast. The smug silence of a man whose enemies were holding meetings under fluorescent lights while he basked in the hum of a home espresso machine. Gregory had the legal department draft a proposal in hours. Consulting role, 6-month contract, generous bonus. And a gag order. No social media. No interviews. Absolute silence. The offer came wrapped in digital gold ribbon. Zach, we recognize the critical nature of your contributions. Consider this an opportunity to restore operational integrity. We are prepared to be flexible. Let's rebuild together. Greg. No mention of apology. No accountability. Just desperation dressed up in HR drag. I composed a response. Gregory, I appreciate the offer. Unfortunately, I don't return to burning buildings. Especially where I was thrown into the fire for optimization. Attached, copy of my termination clause, Section 7C. Confirmation of revocation from the National Board. Screenshot of the company dashboard 72 hours post-termination. You will notice my name is still listed. Grayed out. Irreplaceable. Wishing you compliance and clarity, Zach Miller. No frills. No threats. Just receipts. I clicked send and exhaled like someone closing a door they built, installed, and locked from the outside. Gregory read it silently. He didn't forward it. He didn't respond. He just leaned back, his eyes fixed on that gray screenshot. For the first time since stepping off the yacht, he understood that they weren't just firing an employee. They were excommunicating the only person who understood the religion. If you're following how corporate arrogance can implode an entire company, subscribe to the channel. Because while Gregory was beginning to understand the magnitude of the mistake, I was already 3 steps ahead, ready to show that some burned bridges reveal paths to much better places. 3 weeks later, LinkedIn almost imploded. There I was, lighter hair, sharper smile, dressed in business black like someone who had come to collect. New position, Director of Compliance Strategies, Stratcorp BioCore. The post was short. Stratcorp secures Omega Med and Viarc contracts, citing continued compliance confidence as a deciding factor. The crown jewels. The 2 biggest clients my former company boasted on every earnings call. Now they've packed their bags after hearing that the to-do list has reached unknown reactivation window. Meanwhile, back to the old turf, still stuck. The dashboard never turned green. Fines arrived daily. Suppliers abandoned us. The end-of-year party was cancelled. Matt? There wasn't even a farewell cake. Just a 3-minute Zoom call and a transition plan that sounded like an obituary. Now I have a corner office. Glass walls, espresso machine, chair that doesn't squeak. Every morning I watch the industry pings like storm forecasts I've already flown above. One ping. Another. Former company flagged as non-compliant. Status pending. Failures under appeal. A sip of Colombian coffee with a dash of smugness. Above the desk, pinned with a blue thumbtack, a yellow sticky note. No emoji. 5 words in block letters, in case you forgot who I was. Because while Matt was finally learning that he had confused a fuse with a shoelace, I was already mastering new territory. And best of all, he still had no idea how big a hole he had dug. 6 weeks later, my phone rang at 5:43 a.m. It was Liz from documentation. Her voice was broken, almost whispering, "Zach, you need to know, they're going bankrupt." I didn't pretend to be surprised. I just got up, made coffee, and turned on the local TV. There it was, biotech company faces closure after cascading regulatory violations. The reporter was standing in front of the building I used to call my office. Half the lights were out, and employee cars were disappearing from the parking lot like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Operations have been suspended indefinitely after audit failures spread across 3 different federal departments, he explained. Internal sources report a total collapse of compliance systems that could result in fines in excess of $15 million. $15 million. Interesting. My estimate was 20. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. 12 missed calls. All from numbers I recognized, but none I wanted to answer. The last voicemail was from Gregory. He was no longer the confident, tan CEO. He was a broken man. "Zach, please, can you reverse this? I'll pay anything. Anything." I deleted it without responding. On Monday, when I arrived at my new office at Stratcorp, I found some interesting correspondence on my desk. An official envelope from the Federal Compliance Council. Notice of investigation initiated, Winslow Enterprises. I read it calmly while sipping my Colombian coffee. They were under formal investigation for systematic regulatory negligence and operating without proper certification. These were charges that could result not only in fines, but permanent bans from operating in regulated industries. What they didn't know was that this investigation wasn't as random as they thought. You see, when I resigned my credentials, I also activated automatic reports to 3 different agencies. Reports that highlighted risk patterns in companies that lost compliance oversight abruptly. Those agencies tend to investigate companies flagged in their systems, especially when the algorithms detect that critical licenses have been revoked without adequate succession plans, especially when the person who held those licenses had a spotless 10-year track record, especially when that same person now worked for a direct competitor. On Wednesday, I received an email from Renee, the poor analyst who tried to explain compliance to Matt. She had landed a job at another company but wanted to tell me what happened in Winslow's final days. Matt had a complete nervous breakdown on Thursday, she wrote. He was screaming in Gregory's office about how no one had explained federal licenses to him. Gregory responded by asking if he thought compliance was just decorative paperwork. I smiled. Because finally, someone had asked Matt the right question. On Friday, she continued, the federal agents arrived. They weren't auditors this time. They were investigators. With warrants. Federal agents. That meant they had found evidence of criminal violations, not just administrative ones. Which made sense. When you operate without proper licenses in regulated industries like biotech, you're not just violating corporate policy. You're potentially putting lives at risk. And when federal investigators discovered that Matt had fired the company's only certified compliance officer without checking to see if anyone else could take over the responsibilities, well, criminal negligence was a charge that stuck. That night, I opened LinkedIn and saw that Gregory had posted a career update. He was listed as an independent consultant code for unemployed, but too proud to admit it. Matt had simply disappeared from the platform. Profile deleted, connections lost, years of corporate networking erased as if they had never existed. But the best part came on Friday. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of curiosity. Zach Miller. Yes. This is Agent Sarah Chun, FBI White Collar Division. We'd like to talk to you about your previous experience at Winslow Enterprises. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't sweat. I just smiled, because I knew exactly why they were calling. Sure, Agent Chun. When would you like to talk? Would this afternoon be possible? We understand that you had extensive knowledge of the company's compliance systems. I did. And I still do. All the documentation I built over 10 years. There was a pause. You kept records? Agent Chun, I said calmly, I built these systems from the ground up. Of course I kept records. What I didn't say was that those records included every email Matt sent about eliminating redundancies, every meeting where he ignored compliance warnings, every decision that prioritized cost cuts over regulatory safety. Evidence that, in the right hands, would turn an administrative investigation into criminal proceedings. Because while Matt thought he was eliminating legacy overhead, he was creating a perfect paper trail of his own negligence. And me? I was just doing my civic duty. Helping the authorities understand how a reputable company became a public danger. When I hung up, I looked out my office window. Across town, Matt was probably discovering that being an efficiency optimizer on your resume doesn't impress criminal lawyers. The irony was delicious. He fired me for being legacy overhead. Now I was the only person in the world who could explain to federal authorities exactly how he had turned a functioning company into a regulatory time bomb. And the best part? I didn't even have to lie. Just tell the truth about every system I built, every protocol I established, and every warning I gave about the consequences of removing proper compliance. The truth he chose to ignore when he decided that 10 years of specialized experience could be replaced with buzzwords and youthful arrogance. Because in the end, he discovered that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. 6 months later, I received an invitation that changed everything. It wasn't to testify in court, although my testimony to the FBI had contributed to Matt facing criminal negligence charges. It wasn't for a meeting of former employees lamenting the past. It was to speak at a compliance conference in San Francisco. The topic, Building Sustainable Systems of Corporate Governance. As I prepared in my hotel room, I opened LinkedIn one last time to check industry updates. Matt had posted something for the first time in months, humbly starting a new journey as a small business consultant. Learning that true success comes from serving others. I felt no vindictive satisfaction. Just the quiet understanding that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. In the conference audience, I recognized familiar faces. CEOs who had fired their compliance experts to cut costs. Directors who thought experience was legacy baggage. Managers who confused buzzwords with competence. I began my presentation with a simple question. How many of you would fire the pilot mid-flight to save fuel? Nervous laughter echoed through the auditorium. Because that's exactly what you do when you eliminate experienced compliance professionals without understanding that they don't just follow rules. They build the systems that prevent your company from becoming a regulatory time bomb. For 45 minutes, I told my story. Not as revenge, but as a case study of the systematic consequences of impulsive corporate decisions. At the end, the ovation was intense. But what struck me most were the conversations after the talk. I have an employee who's been with me for 15 years that everyone calls a dinosaur, confessed a biotech CEO. After your presentation, I think I need to promote him, not fire him. My board was pushing to outsource our compliance, said another executive. Now I understand why that would be a disaster. 3 weeks later, my inbox exploded with offers. Not just jobs, invitations to consult, requests to develop training programs, proposals for strategic partnerships. Stratcorp offered me a partnership. Other companies promised entire teams under my supervision. Universities wanted me to develop corporate ethics curricula. I chose a different path. I opened my own consulting firm, Miller Compliance Solutions, specializing in helping companies that nearly destroyed themselves by ignoring their own safety systems. My first client? A biotech startup whose young, arrogant CEO had fired his entire compliance team for optimization. They were facing a federal investigation and possible closure. "Mr. Miller," he said at our first meeting, clearly embarrassed. "I know we've made mistakes. Could you help us rebuild from scratch?" It was Matt 2.0. Same arrogance, same disregard for experience, same inevitable consequences. But this time, he was asking for help before it was too late. "I can help," I replied calmly. "But first you need to understand something fundamental. Compliance is not an obstacle to growth. It's what makes growth sustainable." Over the next few months, we completely rebuilt his systems. Not just to avoid legal problems, but to create a culture where experience was valued, processes were respected, and decisions were made based on knowledge, not buzzwords. The company not only survived the investigation, it thrived. 6 months later, it closed a $50 million investment round. Investors cited exemplary governance as a deciding factor. As for the original Matt, I heard he was working for a small-town consulting firm, helping family businesses with digital modernization. Far from federal licenses, complex audits, or anything that could explode if handled incorrectly. Maybe he found his true calling. I hope so. Because the lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, it was about value. When you build something solid, lasting, and essential, you don't need to take revenge on those who don't recognize its importance. You just need to find those who do. Last week, I received an email from Renee, the young analyst who witnessed my firing. She had been promoted to Director of Compliance at her new company and wanted to thank me for being an example of professional dignity during an impossible situation. "I learned from watching you that true strength isn't in reacting emotionally when we're underestimated," she wrote. "It's in building something so valuable that your absence becomes undeniable." Today, when I look out my office window, at the Bay, my team of 12 experts, clients on 3 continents, I don't think about the man who called me legacy baggage. I think of the young professionals I've mentored, the systems I've helped build, the companies I've saved from their own recklessness. I think of how a dismissal that should have destroyed me ended up freeing me to build something much greater than I ever imagined. If this story touched you, if you've ever been underestimated by those who didn't recognize your value, subscribe to the channel. We have hundreds of stories about people who turned humiliation into elevation, disrespect into extraordinary success. Because in the end, I discovered that Matt was right about one thing: I really was legacy overload. Overloaded for a company too small for my potential. Legacy for a place that didn't deserve the system I built. And when I finally found where my value was recognized, where my experience was celebrated, where my expertise was the foundation and not the obstacle, well, I discovered that there is no limit to what you can build when you no longer have to prove you deserve to be there. The last I heard from Matt, he was still trying to explain to potential employers why a solid company collapsed shortly after he optimized its operations. Me? I'm building an empire based on the revolutionary premise that experience matters, well-designed systems work, and respecting those who build the foundations is the difference between sustainable growth and spectacular explosion. And you know what? I've never felt so young.